It was an ordinary day in southern India, and at the home of the sub-magistrate for the town of Needamangalam, clothes had been laundered and left to dry in front of the fire. When one of the family's children, lying in their cradle upstairs, began to cry, the women of the house rushed to them and discovered the nearby clothes ablaze. Water was thrown onto the garments and the flames subsequently smothered, with it thought that they had simply been left too close to the open fire. When they caught fire again, extinguished, half-burnt and still wet, draped over a chair, the household was utterly confused. Even the chair had been burning. Shocked, they could only attribute the incident to the carelessness of the family's daughter, who had been tasked with lighting the fire. And yet, before too long, it became clear that the cause of the fiery accident was something inexplicable, and quite possibly sinister. For other things, lengths of silk, curtains, religious paintings, and even crucifixes also caught fire in the house, all seemingly without explanation. And so it was feared that the happenings were the work of devils who, as time went by, are said to have become bolder and more aggressive, so intent on fulfilling their diabolical purpose that, in addition to causing destruction of objects and artifacts within the home, they physically attack the children living there also. My name is Laura, and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar. Before we dive too deeply into this topic, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank Bright Cellars for kindly sponsoring today's video. Bright Cellars is a monthly wine box that matches your palate to an exclusive selection of premium wines from around the world and conveniently delivers them to your door. By taking their quick online quiz, your individual taste preferences will make their way into your guaranteed to delight box, meaning you might end up with a selection that includes anything from fruity, fragrant whites to rich, oaky reds. As some of you might know, I've had the chance to get to know Bright Cellars for quite some time now, and I absolutely love not merely their wines, but their entire ethos, specifically their approach to wine curation and education. For example, their boxes come with wine education cards for each bottle, outlining details such as tasting notes, suggested pairings, and origins. I even had the chance to ask one of their wine experts a few questions about their selection process, including how they source new wines for their boxes and how big a part origin plays in the wines they select.
So while the origin and appellation of the wine is important, in that it shapes what you taste in the glass, it's never going to be the only factor that motivates us to choose a specific wine. The quality, specifically the taste, and how it suits the needs of our members is much more important.
And so the easy convenience of a Bright Cellars box shouldn't fool you. Much expertise and effort is mustered behind the scenes to ensure every wine chosen for you is not merely high quality, but unique, delicious, and unable to be purchased anywhere else. With the holiday season upon us, now is the best time to relax and enjoy a glass of full-bodied and richly flavoured red wine by the fire, and even better if you can share it with loved ones, with a Bright Cellars 6-bottle box being ideal for serving at your festive parties or bringing as a gift to those you are attending. So if you are interested in starting your own wine journey, Bright Cellars is very generously giving my viewers a limited time offer of $50 off your first 6-bottle box. Simply click my exclusive discount link in the description to get started. Thank you again to Bright Cellars for continuing to support my channel. Now, on with the video. In the 1920s, Mr. A.S.T. Pillay was well regarded in his local community. Described as an honourable and conscientious Catholic, he was also the sub-magistrate for the town and was in charge of obtaining land revenue taxes for the southeastern Indian district of Tanjavur. A serious, hard-working patriarch, he had little time for silliness, and so when a series of strange fires broke out in his home, his daughter was immediately blamed. This was the 3rd of March 1920, and yet only the very next day, fires were started again. Pillay had not long arrived at his office when an attendant rushed to him to inform him that several fires had broken out, simultaneously, in different places throughout the home. Upstairs, a piece of silk was set ablaze, while downstairs in the kitchen, curtains burst into flames in 2 different places. And so Pillay raced home. When he arrived, it was clear that his daughter could not have been responsible. Thus, fearing that an otherworldly influence was to blame, he suspended pictures of the Sacred Heart, Blessed Virgin, and other saints in the upstairs and downstairs, and also drew chalk crosses on the walls, doors, and other entrances throughout the building. Horrifically, all the pictures were burnt, cross marks were found rubbed out by cow dung, and a big picture of St. Margaret Mary with a glass frame was found thrown down and the glass broken to pieces, though the knot which tied it in the nail in the wall was still intact. And so the Pillay house seemed to be under supernatural assault. By the end of the day, despite the family reciting prayers, the activity increased, with the image of St. Margaret Mary supposedly found torn to pieces. Confused and utterly terrified, the family asked a priest to come and bless the house that same evening. Yet more prayers were said, and a medal of St. Benedict was hung up. However, it was, so we are told, almost immediately removed, how and by what unknown, after which the happenings intensified again. At this point in the case, it would be easy to attribute the activity, the fires, the vandalism, the movement of objects and cow dung to the hands of a mortal trickster. After all, we are told, via the diary entries Mr. Pillay kept and later shared with the Jesuit periodical, The Month, that there were several children in the home. Such mischief may have originated from them. And yet, if the events which are claimed to have followed can be believed, this explanation very quickly starts to look less and less likely. After all, the day after the priest's blessing, a heavy standing crucifix made of German silver that had been placed upstairs went missing. A short while afterwards, one of the family's neighbours is said to have come and knocked on the house's door. Something, he told them, had fallen onto his roof. Incredibly, when it was examined, the crucifix was found on the roof of that house. The next day again, on the 6th of March, yet more strangeness was alleged. This time the door to the kitchen was, after a great slam, bolted shut from the inside and with no one in the room. No amount of force applied to the door could loosen it, and so one of the household servants was left with no option but to climb over the wall, what are described as compartments in the house, seemingly separated by partitions which did not reach the ceiling. Once inside, the lock was able to be released. The servant also discovered the room in disarray. It had been no more than 5 minutes since the door closed, and yet all of the chalk crosses, re-established by the family in an act of protection, had supposedly been rubbed out with cow dung. Not merely that, a large charcoal X had been drawn over each of them. And so the Pillay family was deeply concerned. Physical phenomena, fires, breakages, and now doors locking on their own, all of which appeared to have a dislike of religious emblems. When a catechist from a cathedral located some 60 miles away visited the house, they were horrified to witness the still, until that point at least, missing medal of St. Benedict fall through the air in front of them. According to Pillay's diary, he was also present to witness the mysterious incident, and described how it came from the roof of the house in a slanting direction, as if somebody threw it from the roof. There was, however, no one there, and so no reason why the missing medal would have suddenly manifested in that way. There was equally no explanation for the vessel of milk, which was said to have been similarly thrown on the ground from the hearth, other than, perhaps, diabolical influence. Incidents such as this are said to have become commonplace within the house over the next 2 weeks. Whilst eating together, the family would be forced to endure their food being lifted from the table by unseen hands. As Mr. Pillay's written testimony alleges, on one occasion a mud vessel with cooked rice rose high to the roof of the house and fell down, the pot itself having been broken to pieces. Deeply disturbed, fearing for their children, and terrified of the entity that appeared to have taken up residence in their home, the Pillays made the decision to temporarily relocate to another property. They hoped, so Mr. Pillay wrote, that the devil might be confined to one particular house, and that in the new house we could have peace of mind. This was not to be. For, according to the report published at the time, almost immediately after moving, more items, including 2 broomsticks, were supposedly set ablaze. The metal crucifix was broken into 2 and thrown with great force, and further objects, including the new clay pots purchased to replace those which had been previously destroyed, were smashed. And so the entity, whatever it was, had followed the family. After this, the activity can be said to have changed and intensified yet again. Dramatically and terribly, it is reported that 3 of the family's children received blows at one and the same time, causing them to weep simultaneously. And so, fearing for his little ones, Mr. Pillay, on the advice of his nephew, asked for help from the local bishop. The police, we are told, were also invited to come to the house. A specially blessed medal from the bishop was hung in the house. The police, believing Pillay's claims, also recommended that he attempt to appease the assaulting entity by leaving what is referred to in the account as toddy, a type of fermented juice made from the sap of palm trees, around the house. This alcoholic liquid was to be poured, so they explained, twice daily into vessels which would then be placed in the corners of the building. Mr. Pillay supposedly got the required drink at once, placing it in a copper vessel in one corner of the house, leaving the remainder in another vessel to be used in the evening. By the time the end of the day approached, however, the reserve had been lost, with the malevolent force, so it seems, having somehow assaulted the vessel, causing it to be split. Thus, all manner of things were attempted in order to shake the activity, from prayers and religious artifacts to local superstitious solutions. And yet nothing, it seems, provided relief, with Pillay reporting that small vessels and small baskets were being thrown throughout the day from one place to another. At dinner, a copper vessel was supposedly snatched away from one of the women's hands by an invisible force and thrown on the ground. Likewise, when Pillay's daughter's husband took hold of the rice vessel, there was said to have been a horrific tug-of-war between him and the devil, the former seizing the vessel very strongly, and the latter trying with great force to snatch away the vessel. Mealtimes then were nothing short of pandemonium. And within a few short days, the pandemonium is said to have spread to all aspects of life for the family, with Pillay describing how once every 5 minutes we may see some act or other done. Sensationally, he even wrote that bricks will be thrown inside from outside. In particular, the invisible entity had special preference for disrupting food, both the eating and preparation of it. And so, as has been reported in many similar cases of the time, including the curious incidents surrounding Eleanora Zugan and another Indian case, the Poona Poltergeist, all manner of pots and pans were lifted, dropped and smashed in the home, with the women who worked in the kitchen becoming so frightened of the entity which stalked them unseen that they refused to work there. When one woman, the mother-in-law of Pillay's daughter, attempted to clean a fish, she, so it was alleged, received a blow by means of a piece of wood. Dreadfully, such violence would soon become a regular occurrence within the house. Writing in his diary, Pillay draws specific attention to an evening when he watched over the women and children in the house. They were terrified, being unable to escape the madness which is said to have manifested all around, and so Pillay, armed with just his rosary and crucifix, encouraged them to recite the prayers of Saint Anthony. He reports that, even before he closed his mouth, he received a blow on his back. Supposedly, it caused such swelling that it gave him pain for about 1 full hour. Thus, the presence in the house was firmly concluded to have nurtured a hatred of religion. And not merely that, it was a syncretic, multi-faith malice, for whether it was Catholic prayer or Hindu mantras placed inside vessels about the house, it responded with violence, smashing the vessels and indeed attacking the person who recited the prayer. Then, on the 8th of March, an entirely new dimension to the case took shape. "My name is Raja Madam. I will not leave you." These were the words that were said to have been found written on one of the walls of the bathroom. They had, it seems, appeared overnight, with no culprit being identifiable. In addition to the 2 short sentences, there were also illegible characters. Not merely that, the name, Rajamadam, has been described as meaning King Mischief Maker. Almost as soon as the inexplicable writing was discovered, people came to the house to see it. Amongst them was one of Pillay's office clerks. He, so we are told, decided to reply to the mysterious writing. "Reply sharp," the man wrote. "If you don't run away from this house, I would recommend you to my goddesses for punishment." And certainly, the reply was sharp. The very same day, more writing is said to have appeared. "I will kill the man who wrote these lines," it said. "Don't you know that I am the king? I will not leave this house, whatever the residents do." Terrified, the clerk quickly wrote back, begging to be pardoned. Again, a reply was said to have been received. "I pardoned you. I will not leave them. Have you got sense? I am instigated by someone. Whatever they may do, I will not leave them." And so the family was now certain they were being plagued by an agent of the devil. Under guidance from the church, Pillay was warned not to respond to the diabolical writing. Not only that, the words should be erased from the walls of the home. No good would come from leaving them there. And yet they continued to appear. More words, more threats, and even demands. "I will not leave the residents of this house alone unless they become Hindus," one of the writings is claimed to have said. That same day, in what may be considered a physical threat to reinforce its written ones, the entity is purported to have lifted a big piece of burning wood from the fire and threw it with great force between Pillay's legs. He was holding his son, a child of only 2 years, in his arms at the time. Horrified and yet imbued with an even greater faith than before, Pillay recorded in his diary how he shouted aloud to the unseen entity, offering his own warning in return. "I am the child of God," he said. "I am ready to lose my property, wife, children, and all that I possess, and my life too, but don't think I will ever lose my soul." It was a spiritual battle then, some manner of invading force, unseen, quite possibly diabolical, with the intention of shaking the Pillay family's faith. Those who have written about this case in the decades after its first appearance have placed importance on the proselytizing behavior of the alleged poltergeist. In particular, in her article, Poltergeist Phenomena and the Trickster Archetype, Bridget Burke, an adjunct professor in the Humanities and Religion departments of Montclair State University, has suggested that the elder married daughter of Mr. Pillay may have played a part in the happenings, writing that it appears as though someone is angry about the abandonment of the cultural religion Hinduism. Whilst the case does not make clear whether or not the Pillay family were originally Hindus who converted to Christianity, or how recent such a conversion may have been, it is an interesting analysis nonetheless. Most especially as Burke places special significance on the Jungian concept of catalytic exteriorization phenomena, namely that our thoughts and feelings have such power that they can bring about an event in the real world, such as that which is reported during poltergeist cases. And so was Pillay's daughter responsible, even unknowingly, for all that was happening within the home. Certainly, such an explanation would help to explain why the activity followed the family after they moved to a second property. When considered in this way, the happenings of the 11th of March can be said to be particularly intriguing. It was the day that the priest, sanctioned and sent by the bishop, was due to come to the house to perform a powerful blessing. Pillay writes that in the morning he was supervising the cleaning of the western room, with the object that the very Reverend Father Medelet might stop there for the day, when he suddenly received a severe blow to his left hand, as something else in the room fell down. It was a metal crucifix made of brass, which was kept inside a box in the eastern room. Somehow it had been thrown at him with very great force. Interestingly, Pillay's daughter was in the room with him, sweeping the floor in preparation for the priest at the time. And yet, as fascinating as this theory may be, there are limitations to it. After all, we are never given an insight into the thoughts of the daughter. There is nothing to suggest that she harbored any sort of resentment towards her family's faith. Furthermore, if our thoughts are indeed able to generate material effects, such as a metal crucifix being thrown across the room, are there limitations to this? After all, whilst many of the happenings in the Pillay haunting were of a kinetic variety, object relocations, destructions, and even the starting of fires, encounters with horrible, dark apparitions were reported also. "I observed a shadow," Mr. Pillay wrote in his diary. "It was as high as a human being, covered with a black blanket, but no human being visible. The shadow," so he writes, "then went on to throw a big wooden plate at him from the other side of the room." Strangely, he also reported that just at this moment, the whole house seemed to be filled with dust. When the priest, accompanied by another, arrived at the house, prayers were said. The once broken, now fixed crucifixes were blessed, medals were distributed about the house, and yet more religious images were hung on the walls. With the guidance of Father Medalit, it was agreed that the family would have a novena in honor of Saint Joseph, a novena being 9 successive days of traditional devotional ritual, comprising prayers in the home appealing to a saint for a specific purpose. Invoking Saint Joseph's special aid to drive away the devil would be the purpose, and it would commence that very day so as to finish on the 19th, the feast of Saint Joseph. In this way, Pillay wrote how his home thus became a regular prayer house both day and night. Although there was a cessation of all troubles whilst the prayers were being said, as soon as the devotional activities ended, the mischief would begin again, with items being thrown and disruption everywhere. One time, when a man sent, so we are told, by a rich and influential Christian came to pray with the family, yet another log, hot and inflamed, was supposedly lifted from the fire and launched across the room. And indeed, if the details of this case are to be believed, fire was a favourite of the demonic entity. Pillay describes how the thatched shed in the front of the northern veranda had to be doused in water after catching fire, and even how people's clothes would burst into flame whilst they were wearing them. "How many times I was beaten," he wrote in one despairing diary entry. "The children were beaten, the vessels were thrown, sacred pictures torn and sacred medals missing. God only knows." The activity was so acute, so sudden, so terrible, that the entire family were utterly exhausted. In this state of mind, Pillay went to bed one evening. What he described happening that night was exceptional. It was 3 a.m. and he had just left his room for a moment. As he was returning and half asleep, he saw, so he writes, a female figure standing at the entrance to the eastern room in which I was sleeping. Though there was a light burning, it appeared to me to be dark. It did not disappear, and so, moving to lie down in bed, he supposedly asked, "Who are you?" After which the mysterious figure began to retreat without turning its back. As soon as it retracted as far as the wall, it stopped. Within 2 seconds, it rushed into the room in which I was lying down, and as soon as I saw it again, I asked, "Who are you? Who are you?" To this, the figure allegedly replied, "Why, father," and then left. Unsettled by this encounter, Pillay relayed it to his wife, who then, the next morning, told the same story to their eldest daughter. When she heard it, she was shocked. According to the written report, she had, before going to bed that same night, prayed to her deceased sister, specifically asking for her to help their father with the problems that the household was facing. And so, Mr. Pillay wrote, "The vision I saw in the night must be that of our beloved daughter." And there was more to the story which seemed to confirm this. The next time he went to the bathroom, he is said to have found writing on the wall, not from the previous self-described king of mischief, but from his lost daughter. "My beloved Mama," it read, "I am in the dark place. If I had been in heaven, would I have left you in this condition?" It was signed with her name, and not merely that, was supposedly written, so Pillay attested, in her hand. When he saw this, he started crying and called for his wife. She, we are told, and all the children and maternal aunt came and saw these writings. All began to weep. It was a weeping house for 1 full hour or more. Undoubtedly then, the Pillay family was suffering. Not only were they and their possessions being attacked by some type of angry, hellish entity, but their much-loved daughter was also, even from beyond the grave, being sucked into the activity. And so, on the 17th of March, a mere 14 days after the beginning of the activity, Father Medelet arrived once more to bless the house. He also heard confessions and performed a solemn mass, during which the family received Holy Communion. While he was present, it was reported that nothing serious happened and all was quiet and calm. Before he left, he told Pillay that everything would be all right, and that as the following day was the final day of the novena, and so the feast of Saint Joseph, the family would be free of their torment. Pillay was hopeful too, recording in his diary how, if such came to pass, he would feed not less than 100 poor persons in honour of the saint, and would also publish this great favour done to my family both in Christian and Hindu newspapers. And incredibly, he did just that. For when the 19th of March came, a final flurry of activity is said to have occurred before one last message appeared on the bathroom wall. It told them that the devil was gone. Not merely that, it was also said that it would never again appear, and that it was proceeding to trouble the person who instigated to trouble the family. And so the household was free. 1 week later, their story appeared in the Hindu newspapers, The Friend of the Hindu and The Truth Teller, and later on in Christian publications also. In this way, it can be said that Mr. Pillay's narrative was not written for profit or fame. Certainly, the descriptions shared in these publications were directly taken and translated from his personal diary, his purpose in sharing them being only to educate and give thanks. As such, other than this, there is little more that we know about this case. That said, many of the names of those involved are preserved, such as Father Medelet, as are the titles of the publications in which the story was originally printed. Although now long inaccessible, we can lean on the words of past researchers, including Herbert Thurston and Joseph Crean, who featured the Pillay haunting in a chapter of their 1954 book Ghosts and Poltergeists, to in some way confirm the validity of the happenings. Indeed, Crean affirms that a summary of the case was published in the neighbourhood when the events were still recent. A Catholic journal called the Morning Star featured the story in July 1920, and not only that, was printed by Reverend Brother Joseph, one of the men who personally visited the Pillay family home early on in the happenings, and was able to witness the burnt and torn religious images and clothing remnants for himself. The perhaps best proof we have that this case was genuine, however, comes from Father Medelet himself. After all, sometime after the case concluded, the priest was appointed Archbishop of Madras. As Crean explains, His Grace came to England for the Emancipation Centenary, and he remembered perfectly the visits he paid to the Pillay family. Citing a private conversation that he had with the Archbishop, Crean states that, although Archbishop Medelet was not himself an eyewitness to any of the manifestations, he is able to testify to the real excitement and consternation of the whole family and the impression made in the locality by these doings. And so something certainly seems to have taken place in the Pillay household. Whether this was paranormal, a poltergeist, a demon, the devil himself, or something other, we cannot know. Even so, regardless of who or what was to blame, it is clear that Mr. Pillay knew who was to thank. In his concluding remark, written 1 month after the end of the happenings, he confirmed that he and his family were enjoying complete peace of mind, and that it was due to their patron saint and benefactor, Saint Joseph. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more of the paranormal. Equally, you might like to sign up to my email newsletter over on paranormalscholar.com to receive notifications of all new content straight to your email inbox. And if you cannot wait until my next video, why not watch the one suggested on screen now? Until next time,